London, 1838. The season had just begun and gossip traveled faster than carriages. Ladies pretended not to listen, yet every whispered secret was fuel for survival. Lords arrived late to the morning market, her lilac parasol trembling slightly under the weight of her thoughts. She had been awake all night rewriting a letter she would never send. It began with love. It ended with silence. Her reputation, once pristine, now floated like lace in the mud, all because of him. The Duke of Edgard, the man who had smiled while rejecting her in front of half of London. They said she had wept in the garden after the winter ball. They said he had found someone younger, prettier, and more daring. They said many things, and every single one of them hurt. Yet the truth was crueler. He had done it on purpose, to make her jealous, to make her confess she loved him. But she never did. She left instead. The air smelled of lavender and betrayal. Her dress, deep violet satin with embroidered lilac flowers, seemed too soft for a heart that was breaking. The ribbons at her waist fluttered as she passed the stalls, pretending to admire apples and ribbons, pretending not to see him. And yet there he was, the Duke, 40 years old and dangerously handsome, with the confidence of a man who had never been denied. His dark hair framed a sharp jaw, his tailcoat black as midnight. He leaned on his cane like a king in exile, watching her with a calm too deliberate to be real. "Miss Lords," he said at last. No bow, no warmth. Just the quiet arrogance of a man who had once held her heart and set it aflame. She turned, eyes cold as glass. "My lord," she whispered. Every syllable hurt. Behind them, a vendor dropped a crate of apples, and London paused. For a moment, they stood in the chaos, two ghosts bound by unfinished words. He wanted to say, "I'm sorry." She wanted to say, "You ruined me." Neither spoke. Instead, he smirked. "You seem well. I had feared you would take solitude too seriously." Her hand trembled, but her voice did not. "I learned that loneliness is safer than false affection." He flinched. For a man who ruled ballrooms, he suddenly looked lost in a common market. The rain began to fall lightly, and she lifted her parasol, turning away. But as she did, he stepped forward. "Lords," he murmured, voice low enough to escape gossip's reach. "Do you still keep the violet ribbon I gave you?" She froze. That ribbon, faded and hidden inside her drawer, was her last confession of love. She didn't answer, and that silence was louder than thunder. That night, under the golden chandeliers of Lady Pembroke's ball, everyone whispered. They said the Duke had spoken to his former fiancée. They said she had ignored him. They said she danced alone. But none of them knew the truth. He hadn't stopped watching her. Not for a second. As she crossed the ballroom, her violet gown shimmered under candlelight like a bruise turning into a flower. Every man wanted to dance with her. Every woman wanted to destroy her. And the Duke, he wanted forgiveness he didn't deserve. When the orchestra began a waltz, their eyes met. For the first time in months, neither pretended. He extended his hand. She hesitated. But the music left her no choice. Their fingers touched and time obeyed. Every memory returned, each laugh, each lie, each night of waiting by the window. He looked into her eyes. "I only rejected you," he whispered, "because I was afraid of losing myself." Her lips parted, trembling between love and fury. "You already lost me." The waltz ended. He bowed, she curtsied. And the world applauded, a tragedy disguised as elegance. As she left the ballroom, her heart ached not from rejection but from the cruelest truth of all. He had loved her too late, or perhaps just in time, because in the next letter she would write but never send, she would reveal the secret no one knew. The Duke was not her enemy. He was her curse. And curses in London never end quietly. Morning fog curled over Covent Garden. Vendors shouted. Carriages rattled like impatient hearts. Lords walked with measured grace. Her violet gown held its own weather. Calm outside, storm within. Rumor followed her like a perfumed shadow. She pretended not to hear. She learned that dignity is also armor. Edgard appeared at the far end of the lane. Black tailcoat. Polished boots. A gaze that could command a room or ruin a day. He stopped beside a stall of violets. The color matched her dress. The memory matched her ache. He spoke first. "I should never have hurt you." He spoke like a man confessing to the wind. She answered like a woman who learned not to beg. "Regret is late. Respect is later." He held out a single ribbon. Violet silk, frayed at the edge. He asked a riddle with a steady voice. Which keeps a heart safer? The hand that gives, or the hand that lets go? She did not take the ribbon. Silence can be a verdict. Silence can be a shield. A plum carriage rolled to a halt. Lacquer gleamed. A crest flashed. Lady Sabine stepped down with a smile sharpened like a fan. She was wealth dressed as mercy. Gold hair coiled. Ice blue silk swept the cobbles. She was the rumor and the echo in one woman. Sabine touched Edgard's sleeve. Her hand lingered one heartbeat too long. Society counts such heartbeats. Society never forgets. So the whispers began. The Duke has chosen. The Violet Girl has lost. The season loves a story with a pretty villain. Lourdes bowed her head to Sabine. The kind of bow that says I see you. The kind of bow that says I will not kneel. Sabine smiled wider. A gracious smile. A dangerous smile. She turned to Edgard with a voice meant for galleries and gossip. Your Grace, Lady Pembroke expects you tonight. Our quadrille will be remembered. The smallest word. The largest wound. Lourdes stepped back. Her fingers brushed a stall of apples. Redskins. Cold morning dew. She steadied herself on simple things. Edgard watched her hand. He had held that hand in another life. He had let it go in this one. He bowed to Lourdes. Too formal for truth. Too careful for courage. Then he offered the ribbon again. For safekeeping. For forgiveness. She shook her head. I will keep my own heart safe. You keep the ribbon. Sabine's coachman opened the door. Sabine entered as if the city belonged to her ankles. Edgard followed without looking away from Lourdes. The carriage door closed with the sound of a vow broken twice. The market breathed again. Lourdes turned toward St. James Street. Her step was light. Her eyes were not. Afternoon brought invitations like arrows. Lady Pembroke's seal bled red wax across cream paper. Attendance expected. Reconciliation predicted. Scandal guaranteed. At dusk, Lourdes dressed with quiet precision. Violet silk with silver beadwork. Lace sleeves like garden frost. Pearl pins in dark hair. Hope tucked where no one could see. The ballroom blazed under a field of chandeliers. Gold music. White laughter, blue envy. Narrators of society stood in corners with their fans. The orchestra tuned expectations. Lady Pembroke floated like a benevolent storm. Edgard entered to a ripple of attention. Black and white. Sword of a jawline. A man in full command and half repentance. Sabine glided beside him. Her gown was winter sky with knives of light. She smiled at everyone and welcomed no one. She took his arm like a title. Lourdes crossed the floor as if she had invented poise. Some men bowed. Some women measured. All kept score. Edgard met Lourdes halfway. Rules demanded a bow. Memory demanded more. He chose the bow. They danced because the music insisted. Steps learned in childhood. Wounds learned last winter. He spoke low during a turn. A promise can be broken by fear. A promise can be rebuilt by truth. She answered during a glide. Fear is a thief. Truth is late. The room spun around their silence. Sabine watched from the edge. Her smile did not reach her eyes. Power rarely smiles with its eyes. Between measures, a footman delivered a folded card to Lourdes. The seal was unfamiliar. Black wax, no crest. A single word inside, midnight, her pulse tripped. A private garden behind Lady Pembroke's orangery. A place for secrets and ruin. A place for second chances or final cuts. Edgard saw the slip of paper vanish into her glove. He recognized the weight of a trap when he felt it in his bones. He could not ask without starting a war. He could not stay without surrendering pride. Sabine leaned in with perfect softness. A waltz is nothing without trust. The sentence was sweet. The message was steel. The dance ended. Applause scattered like pearls. Lourdes curtsied with a calm that did not belong to the past. Edgard straightened with a regret that did not belong to the future. She drifted to the terrace for air. Citrus trees perfumed the dusk. Gaslight hummed. Stars hesitated above London like undecided witnesses. A shadow joined her near the marble balustrade. Not Edgard. Not Sabine. A man in a slate coat, hat brim low. His voice came cool and careful. I serve the one who knows why the Duke staged your humiliation. I carry a choice. Her spine went cold. Her chin lifted. Speak. He handed her a second card. Same black wax. Same careful absence of a crest. The message was brief. Find the ledger. Find the truth. Save the man who broke you. The stranger stepped back into darkness. He was gone in 3 breaths. He left behind the scent of rain and the taste of danger. Lourdes looked toward the ballroom doors. Edgard stood framed in gold light. He watched the terrace like a soldier watches a shoreline. He looked older than 40. He looked younger than forgiveness. Sabine appeared at his shoulder with a glass of champagne. Her smile promised safety to the people who feared courage. Her voice floated out like silk. "Come, Your Grace, our friends are waiting." The clock struck 11. Lourdes folded both cards into her glove. She set her shoulders. She would go to the orangery at midnight. She would go alone. A footman slipped a note under the terrace door. Pembroke's household had become an accomplice to fate. Lourdes read the final line and felt the world tilt. The ledger lies where the first betrayal was written. The ledger lies in your mother's music box. Her breath left her. The music box had vanished years ago. The music box had belonged to a woman who hid tenderness behind perfect posture. The music box had last been seen at a winter charity auction, hosted by Lady Sabine. The orchestra swelled. The crowd cheered a new arrival. Lourdes stepped back into the ballroom like a general who hides strategy inside a smile. Edgard reached her side without asking permission. He looked at her hands. He saw nothing. He felt everything. He offered his arm. One more waltz. One more chance. One more risk. She took his arm because courage sometimes wears civility. They moved in a circle that felt like a vow learning to walk again. He spoke during the final turn. "Answer the riddle and I will leave you in peace. Which keeps a heart safer, the hand that gives, or the hand that lets go?" She held his gaze. Neither. The heart is only safe when it learns to choose. The music ended on that blade of truth. Applause broke like surf. Sabine clapped first. Her smile was flawless. Her eyes were winter. Midnight approached with velvet feet. The terrace doors opened to darker air. Lourdes slipped away before the crowd remembered her name. In the garden, lamps burned like patient stars. Orange trees rustled. Somewhere a fountain counted the seconds. She reached the glass house door. The lock was already turned. The air smelled of citrus and old paper, the kind of air that keeps secrets alive. A single lantern waited on a wrought iron table. Beside it lay a familiar object. Carved wood, mother of pearl. A tiny silver key tied with violet thread. The music box found, returned, waiting. She lifted the lid. The melody rose like a ghost who forgives slowly. Under the velvet lining rested a thin leather book. A ledger bound in shame, names, dates, sums, signatures. At the bottom of the first page was a mark in black ink, a signature she recognized from 1,000 invitations and 3 careful smiles. "Lady Sabine." The lantern hissed. A footstep sounded behind her, soft, certain, close. Lourdes raised her eyes to the glass. A reflection formed beside her, tall, dark, unavoidable. Edgard stood at her shoulder. His voice was low and raw. "What have you found?" From the shadows on the opposite side of the glass, another figure emerged. A second silhouette. A rustle of silk. A knife of perfume. Sabine stepped into the lantern light with a calm that did not belong to innocence. Her gloved hand lifted. Her smile was perfect. Her eyes were winter sharpened to a blade. The door clicked shut behind them. The key vanished from the table. The garden went quieter than prayer. The season loved a scandal. Tonight it would be fed. The clock in Lady Pembroke's hall struck midnight. Its echo ran down the marble like a sentence already written. Lourdes stood between orange trees and ghosts. The ledger trembled in her hands. Each line of ink a sin dressed as commerce. Debts, names, prices, and at the bottom, the same signature repeated like obsession. Sabine. Edgard took one step closer. The air between them thinned. He had come to stop her, or to join her. Neither of them knew which. Sabine closed the glass house door. The lock turned with a whisper meant for gossip columns. She walked toward them with the precision of a queen who never forgives. "You should have stayed quiet, Lourdes." Her tone was silk stretched over poison. "London prefers its scandals tidy." Lourdes straightened her spine. "London prefers them profitable." Sabine's eyes glittered. "You were never meant to know about the fund, or the missing widows, or the letters the Duke signed." Edgard's jaw tightened. Enough. His voice was thunder wrapped in guilt. He looked at Lourdes. She deserved truth, even if it broke him. "I signed those papers, but I never touched their gold." Sabine forged the second set. "She used my name to build her empire of charity and lies." Sabine laughed. "You call them lies. I call them survival." The lantern flame bent under a gust. Shadows twisted around the citrus leaves. For a moment, the three of them were trapped in the same reflection: love, betrayal, power. Lourdes set the ledger on the table. Her hands no longer shook. She had come to the ball in search of closure. She had found war. You both played with hearts as if they were coins. Now you will answer for the cost. Sabine's hand slipped inside her sleeve. Steel flashed. A small dagger, jeweled and elegant. Edgard stepped forward, but Lourdes was faster. She snatched the music box and struck Sabine's wrist. The blade fell against the marble with a cry like glass. Guards shouted from beyond the hedges. Pembroke's guest had noticed the noise. The garden lights flickered alive. Sabine's mask cracked for the first time. Rage and ruin beneath pearls. She turned to flee, but Edgard caught her arm. You will return every coin you stole, and every name you silenced, Sabine hissed. And you will return to your violet girl like a beggar? London will feast on your repentance. Let them, he looked at Lourdes. The first honest look he had given in years. Let them know I finally learned what worth means. The guards entered, gasping at the sight of the Duchess of Frost herself cornered in an orangery. Sabine stood proud even in defeat. You may have my scandal. You will never have my peace. They led her away through the rose path, pearls scattering like tears. The scent of citrus returned. The night exhaled. Lourdes closed the ledger. Edgard watched her fingers. He no longer saw a delicate lady ruined by gossip. He saw the woman who had saved his soul with a music box. He spoke softly. I never deserved your forgiveness. She answered softly. Then earn it. A bell rang in the distance. Morning touched the horizon. London would wake to its newest scandal, embroidered with the words redemption and ruin. She turned toward the first light. He followed without asking. Two silhouettes against dawn, two hearts no longer pretending. The season would whisper. The ton would speculate. But only the garden knew the truth. The Duke had loved her all along. And love, once mocked, had learned to fight back. In every heart once wounded lies the seed of courage. Sometimes forgiveness is not surrender. It is the quiet decision to begin again. If this chapter stirred you, leave a comment, share your thoughts, and subscribe for the next part of our Regency tale. Your support keeps these stories alive, one heartbeat at a time. Spring returned to London draped in gossip. The scandal of Lady Sabine had burned through the ton like perfume set to fire. Her fortune seized, her titles suspended, her name now whispered only in the kind of conversations that began with pity and ended in delight. Lourdes lived quietly in Mayfair, in a townhouse with lilac curtains and too many memories. She had chosen solitude once more, though this time not from shame. She needed silence to remember who she was before the Duke, before betrayal, before her heart became an exhibit in society's theater. Each morning she walked in Hyde Park with her shawl wrapped tight. People bowed politely, pretending they did not stare. They always stared. The Violet Lady, they called her. The one who refused to marry the Duke even after he redeemed his name. Edgard had left for Somerset after the trial. They said he wished to rebuild his estate, pay his debts, bury his pride. He wrote letters, though she never answered. Not because she hated him, because she still loved him too much to trust herself. Until one afternoon, a coach stopped at her gate. A footman stepped down with a familiar seal pressed in wax. The letter was brief, the handwriting unsteady. Lourdes, I am ill. The doctors speak in months. Come if your heart allows. There is something I must tell you before silence does. She sat at her writing desk for hours. Ink dried. Candle burned. Finally, she folded her hesitation into a single decision. The next morning, she left London. The road to Somerset was long and kind. Fields rolled like open prayers. The sky promised mercy without guarantees. When her carriage stopped before Ashford Manor, time seemed to bow in greeting. The once proud estate bore the marks of humility. Vines climbed over marble. The fountain was dry, and yet there was beauty in its surrender. A butler opened the door. He was older now, like everyone touched by regret. Your Grace has been expecting you. She followed him through corridors heavy with memory. The same paintings, the same scent of cedar and faint smoke. She reached the library. Edgard stood by the window, thinner, grayer, still magnificent. Sunlight framed him like forgiveness in human form. He turned. For a heartbeat, he forgot to breathe. You came, she nodded. I came. He smiled faintly. London will be disappointed. They thrive on endings, not healing. She walked closer. I stopped living for London when I realized I could live for myself." He studied her. The woman who once trembled now looked like peace carved in violet silk. "I kept your letters," he said quietly. "Even the ones you never sent." She met his gaze. "Then perhaps you know them by heart." He gestured toward a small table. Upon it lay the music box. Its melody began before she could refuse, soft, steady, like a prayer repeated for a lost chance. "I learned kindness is only weakness when shown to those who do not deserve it." He extended his hand. "Not as a duke, as a man, stay, not for forgiveness. For today." The light shifted through the window. For the first time in years, she let herself breathe in rhythm with another soul. She placed her hand in his. "For today," she whispered. Outside, lilacs bloomed by the fountain that had been dry for years. Inside, two hearts stopped pretending to be stronger apart. The clock ticked softly. Not a countdown. A beginning. The days at Ashford Manor passed softly, like verses whispered between heartbeats. Lourdes tended to the gardens in the mornings. Edgard watched from the veranda, his cane resting beside him, his eyes gentler now. He had once commanded rooms filled with lords and laughter. Now he found peace and silence. He said the air here healed him more than the doctors ever could. She said healing came from truth finally spoken. Each afternoon she read aloud by the window. Poems about redemption, letters of travelers who returned home. Stories of love that arrived too late and yet still mattered. Sometimes when the light faded, he would ask her to play the music box. The melody filled the house with forgiveness. It was no longer a sound of sorrow. It was a lullaby for second chances. One evening, as the sky burned gold and lavender, Lourdes entered the library and found him writing. A sealed letter rested beside an empty glass. He looked up, tired but peaceful. "This will be my last letter," he said. "I have written to the crown. Sabine's victims will receive what she took, and I will leave what remains to the orphanage near Hyde Park." She felt her chest tighten. "And to yourself, what will you leave?" He smiled faintly. You. You are my peace after the storm. If I am remembered at all, let it be for the man who tried to love rightly at last." She stepped closer, her hand trembling as it found his shoulder. "Do not speak as if you are already gone." He looked at her with quiet devotion. "Then promise me one thing. When spring comes again, if I am not here, you will not wear mourning. You will wear violet as you always did, because that color means courage." Her tears fell onto his hand. "You will be here." But that night, when the rain began, something shifted. The manor grew too quiet. The music box played by itself in the next room. And by dawn, Edgard Harris, Duke of Ashford, had taken his final breath beneath the same sunrise he once promised her. Lourdes did not scream. She did not faint. She simply held his hand until it grew cold, whispering prayers she had forgotten the words for. The funeral was small. No gossip, no crowds. Only the sound of spring birds and the scent of violet ribbons tied around every stone. A month later, a letter arrived for her in Edgard's handwriting. It had been sealed before his final illness. Inside was a single sentence. "When I pretended to reject you, I did not know it would become my truth. When you left, I learned that pride is the only disease I never survived." She pressed the letter to her heart and smiled through tears. Then she walked to the garden he loved, where the lilacs were in bloom again. She placed the letter beneath the soil. Above it, she planted a new violet bush. It would grow each year just as love did, quietly, even after the world believed it ended. London spoke of her with awe and tenderness. The violet lady who never remarried, who turned an estate of scandal into a haven for widows and orphans, who smiled kindly when people spoke of the Duke. But those who visited Ashford Manor swore that on rainy nights, the scent of lilacs filled the air, and the faint tune of a music box echoed through the halls. As if love itself refused to rest. A year had passed since the Duke's passing. The city had changed. The season glittered as always, but some whispers carried warmth instead of cruelty. Lourdes returned to London not as the woman once pitied, but as the benefactress of the Violet House, a home for women left behind by society. Widows. Servants dismissed without cause. Girls with no dowry and no defense. She had turned pain into purpose and scandal into sanctuary. The Ton could not decide whether to despise or admire her. They settled on fascination. Every morning she walked through Hyde Park carrying violets from her own garden. Children from the orphanage ran to greet her, laughing, calling her Lady Violet. The title made her smile. It was kinder than Duchess. But one morning, as she crossed the path near the fountain, a stranger approached. He was young, with the same striking eyes as Edgard, though softer, unsure. He bowed politely. "You are Miss Lourdes, are you not? My father spoke of you." She paused. "Your father," he nodded. "Andrew Harris. The Duke's nephew. He inherited the Somerset estate after his passing." Lourdes inclined her head gently. "I see. How fares Ashford Manor?" He smiled, rebuilt, alive again. "The violet bush by the fountain has grown wild. We could not bring ourselves to trim it. It seems to guard the place." Her heart stirred at the thought. The bush she planted with tears had become a guardian. Andrew hesitated, then extended an envelope. The handwriting was familiar, careful, deliberate. "Before he died, the Duke asked me to deliver this to you 1 year later." He said the words were meant for a time when grief had softened. Lourdes took the letter, her fingers trembling. "Thank you." She waited until she was alone in the garden of her townhouse to open it. The paper was fragile, the ink slightly faded, but the words carried his voice as if he were beside her. "My dearest Lourdes, if you are reading this, then I am where no pride can follow me. I was a man who mistook control for courage and silence for strength. You taught me that love is not something to possess, but something to protect. Do not remember me for my cruelty, but for the day I learned what tenderness means. If the world still judges you, let it. You have already been crowned by grace. When you walk by the lilacs, know that I am there in every fragrance, not haunting, watching, proud. Forever yours, Edgard." Tears blurred the ink, but her smile grew through them. She pressed the letter to her chest and looked up at the spring sky. For the first time in years, the ache in her heart felt gentle. That evening, she hosted a small gathering at Violet House. Candles glowed softly. Music floated like memory. She told the girls stories not of princes or dukes, but of women who had survived disappointment and found purpose. She spoke of kindness, of strength born from loss, of love that heals rather than conquers. And at the end, when the young ones asked if she had ever been loved truly, she nodded. Yes, once by a man who learned too late what love was, and every day since by the God who taught me to forgive. Outside, the evening breeze carried the scent of violets through the open windows. Some swore they heard faint music with it, a melody from an old music box winding itself through the night. Lourdes closed her eyes, listening. Peace was not loud. It was steady. It was home. True love does not always end in marriage. Sometimes it ends in peace and growth, in the quiet joy of knowing you lived sincerely. May we all learn to love as Lourdes did, bravely, even when the world watched. If this chapter touched your soul, comment below what you felt most. Like, share, and subscribe for more stories of timeless love and redemption. Your heart keeps these tales alive. Spring turned to summer and London began to breathe again. The scandals of the past had faded into legend, softened by time and retold in ballrooms with laughter instead of venom. But the legend of the Violet Lady remained untouchable. Lourdes had become a symbol of quiet rebellion. Her grace disarmed critics. Her charity silenced gossip. And her laughter, rare but genuine, became the melody people didn't know they needed. On a warm afternoon, she sat beneath the willow in the Violet House garden, reviewing sketches for the new schoolroom. The children were practicing penmanship nearby, their giggles spilling into the sunlight. For the first time in years, she felt her heart rest. A soft knock at the gate interrupted her peace. It was Andrew again, older now, more assured, though the world still clung to him like freshly pressed linen. He bowed, holding a small box wrapped in pale ribbon. "Lady Violet," he said, smiling. "You always seem to be surrounded by joy." She gestured for him to sit. "Joy grows when watered. Few remember to care for it." He handed her the box. Inside was a silver locket engraved with a violet bloom. "I found it among my uncle's belongings. It has your initials." Her breath caught. She opened it and found 2 small sketches folded within, one of her, one of Edgard. Drawn in charcoal, simple yet tender. He must have kept them all those years. Lourdes closed the locket, tears rising gently. "Thank you, Andrew." She paused, then smiled. "He would have liked to see what you have done with Ashford." He looked down, thoughtful. "He told me once that a house is not grand because of its marble, but because of the laughter it shelters. I think he learned that from you." They walked through the garden, the air filled with lavender and sunlight. Andrew admired the children playing by the fountain. "You gave London something rare. Dignity without pride, kindness without weakness." She looked toward the horizon, her eyes soft. "I gave them what I once needed. A place to belong when the world no longer clapped." He nodded. And what about you, my lady? Do you still wait for love? Her smile deepened, serene and knowing. I no longer wait. Love does not always return as romance. Sometimes it returns as peace. Sometimes as purpose, and sometimes it stays as a seen fragrance of violets through the air. Andrew looked at her, a hint of wonder in his eyes. Perhaps love never left, he said quietly. Perhaps, she answered, it simply learned to speak in silence. That evening, Lourdes stood by her window as twilight painted London in shades of gold and amethyst. In the distance, the church bells began to chime. She held the locket close to her chest and whispered a prayer, not for what was lost, but for what was found. Grace, freedom, and the certainty that she had lived truthfully. The moon rose above the city, lighting the path to Violet House like a benediction. Inside, the children slept peacefully, and in the hush of night, the faint tune of a music box drifted once more through the halls, wrapping the house in tender memory. Some said it was only the wind. Others swore it was the Duke keeping his promise to watch her with pride, wherever peace found her. Lourdes smiled into the quiet, her heart steady, her soul unafraid. For she knew that true love never truly dies. It simply changes its shape and waits in the light. The year turned quietly, like a page read by candlelight. London's nights were softer now, gentler. And in every ballroom, between the chatter of debutantes and the sighs of matrons, someone always mentioned her name. Lourdes, the Violet Lady. The woman who taught London how to love without vanity. But not everyone adored her peace. Some envied it. Because calm is power, and not all hearts forgive those who have mastered it. One foggy morning, a letter arrived. No seal, no name, just a familiar handwriting that stopped her breath. My dearest Lourdes, forgive the intrusion from beyond memory. I am no ghost, though you may think me one. I was once a friend of Edgard, before his title, before his fame. He left something unfinished, and it now lies in your hands to complete. The note contained an address near Kensington and a key wrapped in black thread. Below, a final line. You will understand when the clock strikes 5. Her heart hesitated. Fate had a cruel habit of returning when one finally felt safe. Still, she dressed in violet silk and took her carriage through the drizzle. The house in Kensington was small, secluded, and dimly lit. Inside, time had stood still. Dust gathered on portraits. Books leaned tiredly against each other. And in the center, a single wooden chest waited on a table. She unlocked it. Inside were pages bound by a ribbon, the Duke's handwriting again. Dozens of letters addressed to women, widows, and families who had once suffered because of Sabine's deception. Apologies, promises, payments. Every letter ended the same way. Forgive me. Tell Lourdes I kept my word. She pressed the papers to her chest. He had spent his last strength not on saving his name, but on saving others. A sob broke free, not of grief, but of reverence. At that moment, the old clock on the wall struck 5. The final drawer beneath the chest slid open by its own weight. Inside was a tiny velvet pouch. A ring, violet stone, silver frame. Engraved inside, the words, "Courage is love disguised." Her tears fell freely. He had known her heart better than anyone. He had seen what even she could not. When she left the house, the sun had pierced through the fog. The world glowed pale and golden, as if heaven itself bowed to the memory of redemption. That night, Lourdes placed the ring beside the music box. She wound it once softly. The tune began, slow and tender, filling the room with a love that had never died. She spoke aloud, though no one was there to hear. You kept your word, Edgard, and I will keep mine. From that day forward, every year on the anniversary of his passing, she gathered the women and children at Violet House. They sang. They prayed. They spoke of forgiveness and strength. It became known as the Night of the Violets, a celebration not of death but of second chances, of courage reborn from heartbreak. And when silence finally returned, she would sit alone in her study, open the ring box and whisper a final prayer, not asking for love, thanking God that she had known it so deeply, because love like theirs does not fade with time. It becomes the melody that others live by. It becomes the reason someone else dares to hope. Outside, the garden of violets swayed beneath the moonlight. The scent drifted through the open window, wrapping her like a promise fulfilled. And faintly, from nowhere and everywhere, she could almost hear his voice. You see, my violet heart, even in silence I kept loving you. The streets of London gleamed under a silver rain. Carriages splashed through puddles. Laughter spilled from balconies, and the city pretended not to remember the names it once whispered with venom. Lourdes no longer lived for whispers. She lived for mornings that smelled of rain and violets, for the laughter of children running down the steps of Violet House, for peace that no gossip could steal. That spring, Violet House grew beyond its walls. New donors, new families. Even the Queen had sent a note of recognition for her service to the crown. The scandal that once ruined her name had become her legacy. But one afternoon, as she sat by the window reading, a familiar face appeared at her door. It was Andrew Harris again, no longer the uncertain young man she first met, but a steady, thoughtful gentleman. His expression carried both kindness and purpose. He bowed with quiet respect. "Lady Violet, I bring news from Somerset." She invited him in, serving tea with her usual grace. "What has happened?"
He smiled faintly.
"The violet bush by the fountain has grown into a tree. The groundskeeper says its roots cracked the stone. It seems your love refuses to stay small." She laughed softly. "Then perhaps it reminds us that roots once planted deeply always find a way to live." Andrew nodded. "That is not all." He reached into his coat and placed a sealed parchment on the table. The title read Deed of Ashford Manor. She frowned. "What is this?" He met her gaze, sincerity in his tone. "The estate now belongs to you, by the Duke's final request after my stewardship. It was to be placed in your care once the land flourished again. I have fulfilled his will." Lourdes touched the parchment with trembling fingers. "I do not need grand estates. My heart already found its home." Andrew smiled. "Perhaps. But the Duke believed that the home where love once bloomed should remain in the hands of the one who taught him how to love." Silence settled between them, soft, full, sacred. Outside, the rain eased into sunlight. Lourdes looked toward the window, eyes shimmering. "Ashford will become a refuge, a place where the wounded can heal, not hide, where love is not a luxury but a birthright." Andrew bowed his head. "Then his legacy will live through you." When he left, she walked to her study, unrolled the parchment, and placed it beside the music box and the ring. 3 relics of love, 3 promises kept. That evening, she sat at her writing desk and opened her journal. Her pen glided across the page, steady and certain. Year of our Lord, 1843. "I have learned that the heart's truest purpose is not to be adored, but to adore without fear, to give even when forgotten, to forgive even when unasked, and when love ends, to become the love the world still needs." She signed simply, Lourdes of Violet House. At dawn, she returned to Hyde Park. Mist lingered low, wrapping the city in silver. She knelt by the fountain, dropped a handful of violet petals into the water, and whispered a final prayer. "Thank you, Edgard, for breaking me, so I could become whole." The petals swirled in the current, catching the first light of sunrise. A new day had begun. London was awake again, and somewhere above, a soul smiled. The morning air at Ashford Manor smelled of rain and lilacs. Lourdes arrived quietly, stepping out of the carriage with her hands gloved in white and her heart steady. It had been 5 years since she last crossed this threshold, and yet the place seemed to recognize her, as if it had been waiting. The fountain now stood whole again. Its marble glistened under the sun, and the violet tree bloomed beside it, wide and tall, roots splitting the stone like a gentle rebellion. Birds nested between its branches, singing as though the house had finally found its voice again. The servants bowed when she entered. No longer the Duke's guest, now the Lady of Ashford. She wandered through the halls where her laughter had once been fragile. Now her footsteps were firm, her gaze calm. The portraits of the ancestors watched in silence, but she did not flinch beneath their painted judgment. She had survived them all. In the library, the scent of cedar still lingered. The same shelves, the same light. She placed her hand on the desk where Edgard once wrote his last letters. The ink stains remained, like fingerprints of regret turned into faith. She whispered softly, "We did it, Edgard. Your name is light again. Your story no longer ends in sorrow." She opened the music box. The melody began, sweet and familiar. It filled the room like a blessing. That evening, she hosted the first gathering at the restored manor. Not a ball, not a feast, but a night of gratitude. Women from Violet House arrived with children in their arms. Widows, seamstresses, governesses. The same faces that society once ignored now filled the grand hall with laughter and life. Candles burned along the staircase. Music floated from a violin. For the first time in its long history, Ashford Manor felt holy. Lourdes stood by the fountain with a lantern in her hand. She lifted it high, and the crowd grew quiet. "We gather here not to remember pain, but to honor what was born from it." love that does not ask for perfection, grace that does not demand apology, and courage that blooms. The children clapped. The women cried softly, and from somewhere deep in the garden a nightingale began to sing. When the stars appeared, Lourdes walked alone to the terrace. The air was still. She closed her eyes, and for a fleeting moment she felt it again, his presence warm and steady beside her. Not a ghost. A memory turned into peace. She smiled. Thank you, my Duke, for loving me the only way you knew how, and for teaching me the rest by leaving. The wind stirred her hair, gentle as a caress. The music box played one last note before the flame in the lantern flickered and went out. But even in the dark she felt the light, because some loves never die. They become the air we breathe when the world grows quiet. 2 years later, London was unrecognizable. Factories hummed beyond the river. Street lamps glowed brighter, and the pace of life quickened with the rhythm of progress. But amid all the change, one name never faded from the city's softest corners: Lady Lourdes of Violet House. Her work had spread across parishes and counties, schools for orphaned girls, homes for widows without titles, hospitals for the forgotten, each brick laid in memory of a love that refused to die. Yet fame never interested her. She still lived simply, between the laughter of children and the quiet rustle of lilacs in bloom. Her hair, once chestnut, now carried strands of silver shining like wisdom. Her heart was lighter. Peace had finally become her daily habit. One afternoon, while arranging books in the library of Ashford Manor, a visitor arrived unannounced. Andrew Harris stepped inside, no longer a youth but a man who carried both grace and duty in his bearing. He removed his hat, smiling warmly. Lady Violet, forgive my intrusion, but there is something you should see. She gestured for him to continue. He placed a newspaper on her desk. It was from London's Gazette. The headline read, "The Violet Legacy. A movement of grace and mercy sweeps through England." Below was a portrait of her drawn in soft ink, surrounded by violets and candles. The article spoke of her kindness, her transformation of scandal into sanctuary, her endless compassion. Tears filled her eyes, not from pride but from disbelief. She whispered softly, "They finally write about love without mockery." Andrew smiled. "Because you showed them how." They sat together by the window as the sun filtered through lace curtains. The scent of rain carried the memory of London's early mornings. He looked at her thoughtful. "You once told me love sometimes returns as peace. Do you ever wonder if it could return again as love itself?" She met his gaze, calm and gentle. "Perhaps, but love to me is not only found in another's arms. It is found in every life we choose to lift." Andrew nodded, though his eyes betrayed a quiet affection. "You have lifted many, but you forget one yourself." She smiled faintly. "Then perhaps you might help me remember." That evening they walked together through the garden. The violet tree shimmered beneath the twilight sky, its blossoms scattering like blessings. Children ran between the paths, their laughter echoing like music. Lourdes stopped by the fountain, her reflection dancing in the water beside his. For years she had spoken to a memory. Now, for the first time, she felt life answering back. Andrew offered his hand. Not as inheritance, not as duty, but as choice. "Come, my lady. The world has changed enough to forgive happiness." She hesitated, looking up at the stars. In that vast, eternal sky she imagined Edgard smiling, a proud witness, not a jealous ghost. She took Andrew's hand, and for the first time in many years she allowed herself to laugh. The next morning London awoke to sunlight spilling through clouds like forgiveness. At Violet House bells chimed softly and the children danced among the flowers. The legacy of the Duke and the Violet Lady had become more than a story. It had become a living promise. That even when hearts break, they can still bloom again, and every night when the garden grew quiet, a faint melody could still be heard, the song of an old music box carried by the wind. Spring returned once more, gentle and fragrant. The fields around Ashford Manor glowed green with renewal, and the violet tree near the fountain was now taller than the balcony itself. Every petal swayed like a memory. Every breeze carried a whisper of the past. Lourdes stood on the terrace that morning, her shawl resting softly on her shoulders. Her hair, silver and shining, framed a face peaceful in its years. The house around her no longer echoed with pain but with life. Children's laughter, music from the drawing room, voices reading aloud. Ashford Manor had become a sanctuary for the forgotten. Widows wrote letters in the sunroom. Orphans practiced music by the fire, Every room once filled with gossip now carried prayers of gratitude. Love had remade the walls. Andrew walked toward her across the terrace. He had aged gracefully, his expression still carrying that same quiet devotion. He handed her a letter. The handwriting was familiar, her own. He had kept it all these years. "I never sent this," she said softly. He nodded. "You didn't need to. Your life became the answer." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the sunlight break through the clouds. Lourdes turned toward the violet tree. "It blooms brighter every year," she said. He smiled. "Perhaps the Duke keeps watering it from heaven." She laughed, a quiet, melodic laugh that felt like forgiveness itself. "Perhaps he does." That evening they hosted what had become a yearly tradition, the Violet Night. Hundreds of candles illuminated the manor. The townsfolk gathered, singing hymns of love, loss, and rebirth. The music box played in the background, its melody still pure after all these years. Lourdes stood at the top of the staircase and addressed them. Her voice was steady, warm, and full of the wisdom only time could give. "When I was young, I believed love was a crown, something beautiful but heavy. Then I learned it was a garden. It grows only when tended with patience, humility, and grace. Tonight I ask each of you to forgive the past that hurt you, not because it deserves it, but because you do." Applause rose through the hall, mingled with tears and laughter. The children showered her with violets. She smiled, her heart full. Later, as the celebration faded into night, she returned to the garden alone. The moon cast its silver light upon the fountain. She sat on the bench beside the violet tree, closing her eyes. The air was cool and still, and then softly, like an old promise kept, she heard it. A voice, "You did well, my violet heart." She opened her eyes and smiled. No fear, no sorrow, only peace. "Thank you, Edgard, for the lesson, for the love, for everything that came after." A single petal fell from the tree into her hand. She placed it inside her book, between the final pages of her journal where her story would rest. Not as a tragedy, but as a testament. The next morning the sun rose over Somerset, golden and kind. Ashford's bells chimed softly, and though the lady of Violet House was gone, her presence lingered in every corner. Her laughter in the halls, her prayers in the garden, her love in the roots of the violet tree. They say that on warm nights when the flowers bloom, one can still hear the faint sound of a music box playing across the wind a song that never ends. Because love never truly leaves. It simply changes its form and continues to bloom. The city had changed beyond recognition. Steam carriages rolled through the avenues. Electric lamps replaced the glow of candles. And yet, among the noise and haste, one quiet corner of London remained untouched by time. Violet House. The garden still bloomed each spring, a sanctuary of lilacs and laughter amid the clamor of the new world. Children still played by the fountain, their songs rising above the city's hum. And every evening, when the sun began to fade, the caretakers lit lanterns all along the path that led to the small marble statue beneath the old tree. The statue bore a single inscription, "Lourdes of Violet House." She turned pain into mercy and mercy into love. Every visitor who came to see it left with a story in their heart. Some said they could smell violets even in winter. Others claimed that when the night was still, they could hear a faint melody drifting from nowhere, a music box playing softly against the wind. One afternoon, a young woman arrived. She was a writer, searching for truth in forgotten lives. The caretakers told her the story of the Duke who loved too late, of the lady who forgave too soon, of the house that turned sorrow into sanctuary. She listened, eyes glistening. When they showed her the statue, she knelt, touched the marble, and whispered, "Thank you for teaching me what love truly means." That night, back in her small London flat, she wrote a book. She titled it The Violet Lady of Ashford. It began with a heartbreak and ended with peace, and though she never said it aloud, she swore that as she wrote, she smelled violets in the air. Years later, that book would become the tale London cherished most, a story of second chances, of forgiveness, and of love that outlived death itself. And somewhere beyond the stars, in a place where no sorrow exists, two souls watched over the world they had once healed, a duke and his violet lady, still together, still blooming. Because true love never truly leaves. It simply learns how to live forever. The years rolled forward like pages gently turning. England had changed once more. Carriages gave way to locomotives, letters to telegrams, and yet, amid all the progress, one place remained untouched by time's noise. Ashford Manor. Now a haven of peace, it belonged to no single soul. It belonged to a being broken, forgiven, and reborn. The garden stretched wide and fragrant, blanketed with hundreds of violet blossoms that covered the hillside like spilled dusk. Each petal was a memory, each breeze a prayer. Inside, a small museum had been established. The visitors called it the House of Second Chances. There rested the music box, preserved behind glass, still capable of its soft melody when the caretaker wound it once each morning. There rested a violet ring, a letter signed yours and Grace Edgard, and beside them, a journal bound in lilac leather, Lourdes' handwriting filling every page with wisdom, faith, and tenderness. From the final entry in her hand, "If anyone reads this, remember that love is not a possession to keep but a seed to plant. It grows in forgiveness and mercy, in every act of kindness done without reward. The heart that loves without demand never dies. It becomes the light that guides others home." Every year on the 15th of May, the townspeople gathered at dusk. The bell at Ashford rang once for every woman who found refuge there. Children scattered petals over the fountain, and the choir sang the old hymn written in her memory, the Violet Prayer. The lyrics spoke of grace stronger than sorrow, of two hearts that turned pain into legacy, of a world made gentler because they once dared to love. On that year's anniversary, a little girl with ribbons in her hair stopped beside the caretaker. She pointed to the marble plaque beneath the violet tree and asked, "Was she real?" The caretaker smiled. "More real than most of us, my dear, because she lived her life for others, and such lives never fade." He wound the music box one more time. The tune began, slow, tender, and impossibly alive. The sound drifted into the air, mingling with the scent of violets carried by the wind toward the horizon. And perhaps somewhere beyond that horizon, two souls walked together through eternal gardens hand in hand. A duke and his violet lady, still laughing, still loving, still watching over every heart that dared to forgive. Some stories end with goodbye, but the truest ones end with legacy. The duke and the violet lady taught us that every act of love, no matter how small, ripples through generations. It changes the world long after we're gone. Let this story remind you that grace never grows old, and love, real love, outlives everything. If this ending touched your heart, leave a comment sharing what it awakened in you. Like, share, and subscribe to keep their memory blooming. Because every time you choose kindness somewhere in heaven, the music box plays again, and so the song of the violets never truly ended.